The cub was dying when Harlan Voss found her. She was curled in the hollow beneath her mother's jaw, tucked against fur that had already gone stiff and cold, and the sound she made when his boot cracked a branch 30 meters away was not a growl or a whimper, but something between the two. A vibration so low it passed through the ground and climbed up through the soles of his boots into his chest. Harlan froze. He'd been tracking the mother for 6 days through the upland ridge country of Surat II, following claw marks on stone and the acrid scent of apex musk on the wind, and he had expected to find her alive. He had not expected to find her like this, slumped against a granite outcrop with 3 plasma burns through her flank and a 4th that had taken off most of her shoulder, her massive body already beginning to cool in the thin mountain air. And he had not expected the cub. The mother was a greymantle, the largest terrestrial apex predator on Surat II, a species the Colonial Xenozoology Board had classified as apex solitary, high aggression, non-domesticable. Adult females weighed between 300 and 400 kilos. They stood 2 meters at the shoulder on all fours, and when they rose onto their hind legs to assert territorial dominance, they topped 3 meters easily. Their fur was dense, slate gray, threaded with subcutaneous metallic fibers that gave it a faint iron sheen in direct light. Their jaws could crush the femur of a Serethi broadhorn. Their forepaws had 6 digits, 4 weight-bearing and 2 opposable, with retractable claws the color of tarnished copper. They were, by every metric the Galactic Fauna Index used, among the most dangerous terrestrial predators ever catalogued. The cub was the size of a Terran house cat. She couldn't have been more than 3 weeks old. Her fur was still downy, a soft charcoal gray that hadn't yet developed the metallic threading of an adult coat. Her eyes were open but clouded, the pale amber irises barely tracking. She was dehydrated. She was starving. She was pressed against the cooling body of her dead mother with her 6-digit forepaws knotted into the stiff belly fur. And when Harlan took 1 step closer, the low vibration came again, that subsonic thrum that a human ear couldn't hear but a human ribcage could feel. She was warning him. Harlan crouched. He was 46 years old, lean and sunburnt, with the kind of face that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts, a crooked nose broken twice, deep-set gray eyes, hands scarred from 2 decades of fieldwork on worlds where the fauna didn't appreciate being studied. He wore standard Ranger-issue coveralls over a thermal underlayer, both of them stained with mud and Serethi pollen. His sidearm was on his hip, but he didn't reach for it. He reached for the canteen on his belt instead. He poured water into his cupped palm and held it out. The cub's clouded eyes tracked the movement. The subsonic warning stopped. For a long moment nothing happened, just the wind over the ridge and the distant calls of hook-beaked scavengers already circling, drawn by the scent of the dead mother. Then the cub unclenched 1 forepaw from the belly fur, extended it toward his hand, and touched the water with the tip of 1 copper-colored claw. She didn't drink. She touched it and pulled back, and the sound she made was not the warning thrum but something higher and softer, a questioning chirr that Harlan had heard exactly once before, in a field recording from a research station that no longer existed. A greymantle cub, calling for a parent that would not answer. He sat down on the cold stone beside the dead mother and the dying cub, and he stayed there until the cub crawled onto his knee and began licking the water from his palm. That was day 1. The Colonial Wildlife Authority on Surat II was headquartered in a prefab complex at the edge of Dawnbreak Station, the planet's only settlement large enough to warrant a proper administrative hub. The station was mostly Vethani, tall, gray-skinned, methodical people who ran the colonial infrastructure with the efficiency of a species that had been building frontier settlements for 8,000 years. The Wildlife Authority was staffed by 3 Vethani administrators, 1 Tessavari field biologist, and Harlan, who was officially listed as Terran Wildlife Ranger, Grade 4, contract renewable. He carried the cub into the authority office in a field satchel padded with his spare thermal underlayer. She weighed less than 2 kilos. She had stopped making the subsonic warning when he held her against his chest, as if the vibration of his heartbeat was close enough to the thing she was searching for. Administrator Keithra Salvin was behind her desk when he walked in. She was Vethani, mid-50s precise, with the silver-gray complexion and narrow vertical pupils of her species. She looked at the satchel, looked at Harlan and said, "No. She'll die in the field. It's a greymantle. It's 3 weeks old, and it weighs less than my boot. It will grow into an animal that weighs 400 kilograms and eats things larger than you." Keithra pulled up the species file on her terminal and turned the screen so he could see it. The header read, "Greymantle, Surith II Apex Solitary." Beneath it, in red flag text, classification, non-recoverable, rehabilitation not recommended. Captive rearing produces lethal imprinting on handlers. Euthanasia recommended for orphan juveniles per Protocol 7R. Protocol 7R, Keithra said. "You know what that means." "I know what it means." "Then you understand that the authorities' position is." "I'm not asking the authorities' position. I'm asking for a temporary holding pen, a supply of nutrient substitute in 60 days. Keithra Salvin stared at him. The cub shifted inside the satchel and made the questioning churr. One small gray paw appeared over the edge of the fabric, 6 tiny copper claws flexing. "What do you intend to do in 60 days that changes anything?" "Get her strong enough to survive a release." "A release? Into the wild. An orphaned apex predator with no mother to teach her hunting, territory, or threat assessment. An animal that the literature says cannot be rehabilitated." The literature is based on 2 cases, both from controlled environment labs where the cubs were handled by rotating teams. I'll be one person, one scent, one voice. And when she imprints on you, that's the part I'll figure out. Keithra closed her eyes. When she opened them, the look on her face was the particular expression of someone who was about to authorize something she knew was going to end badly, and had decided to let the record show she'd objected. 60 days. The holding compound behind Building 7. If she attacks anyone, Ranger Voss, Protocol 7R takes effect immediately. Understood. He named her Moat, because she was small and because she was the smallest piece of something enormous. The first 30 days were survival. Moat couldn't thermoregulate properly without her mother's body heat, so Harlan slept in the holding compound, a 4-meter square enclosure with composite walls, a drainage floor, and a heat lamp he'd salvaged from the station's decommissioned greenhouse. He built a nest from thermal blankets and dried scrubgrass, and Moat slept in it against his side, her small body pressed to his ribcage, her subsonic churring dropping into the low, steady rhythm that he learned to read as contentment. She ate nutrient substitute from a modified pipette for the first week, then from a shallow dish, then from his hand. By day 12, she was eating solid food, ground Serethi protein mixed with bone meal, and a calcium supplement the Tessivari biologist, a quiet woman named Sari Vaughn, formulated after studying the mineral content of greymantle milk from a 20-year-old sample. Sari visited the compound every 3 days to take measurements. She was fascinated and terrified in roughly equal proportions. She'd written her doctoral thesis on greymantle territorial behavior and had spent 4 years studying them from observation blinds at distances no shorter than 500 meters. "You're sleeping next to one," she said on day 14, watching Moat gnaw on a protein block with milk teeth that were already sharp enough to score composite. "She weighs 4 kilos. She'll weigh 400. And that subsonic communication she does, the churring, in adults that's a territorial challenge. It shakes the ground. It can rupture small blood vessels at close range. Right now it means she's hungry." Sari shook her head, but she kept coming back. She brought a scale, a measuring tape, and a portable biometric scanner, and she kept meticulous records that she labeled with the dry humor of someone who expected catastrophe. Case file. Voluntary greymantle imprinting. Subject 1, handler. Voss, age. By day 20, Moat had doubled in weight. Her fur was thickening, the downy gray darkening toward the slate of an adult coat. The first metallic filaments appeared along her spine, fine threads of iron-tinted keratin that caught the light and gave her back a faint chainmail shimmer. Her eyes cleared. The pale amber brightened to a deep copper gold, and when she looked at Harlan, she tracked him with a focus that was not the vague attention of a newborn but the precise, calculating regard of a predator assessing its environment. She followed him everywhere. When he left the compound to check his ranger stations along the ridge, she pressed against the gate and made the subsonic warning until he returned. When he sat at his workbench repairing equipment, she sat beside him and watched his hands. When he ate, she sat across from him and waited until he put food in her dish, not begging, not whimpering, just watching with those copper-gold eyes until the transaction was complete. Keithra Salvin came to inspect on day 30. She stood outside the compound fence and watched Moat, now 8 kilos and growing fast, trot across the enclosure, climb onto the workbench, and sit beside Harlan's elbow while he filed a field report. The cub's posture was calm, alert, proprietary. She looked at Keithra through the fence with an expression that was neither hostile nor submissive. "She's imprinted," Keithra said. "She's bonded, there's a difference." "Explain the difference to me when she's 200 kilos and someone startles her." The Vithani administrator was not wrong to be afraid. Harlan knew that. He'd read every case study, every field report, every incident log. Greymantle cubs raised in captivity had a history of lethal outcomes, not because they were aggressive by nature, but because they were protective by instinct. And an imprinted greymantle did not distinguish between a genuine threat and someone who moved too quickly near the person it had bonded with. The 2 documented cases had both ended with dead handlers and a euthanized animal, and the literature had closed the book, non-recoverable. But the literature had never accounted for what Harlan was doing, because no one had been stupid enough to try it. He wasn't trying to tame her, he was trying to teach her what she was. Day 40, Moat weighed 14 kilos. Her milk teeth had been replaced by the first set of adult dentition, curved, serrated, designed for tearing through the hide of Serethi broadhorns. Her retractable claws had hardened from the soft copper of infancy to the dark bronze of a juvenile, and when she extended them, they were 4 centimeters long and sharp enough to score the composite floor. Harlan took her outside the compound for the first time. He walked her into the scrubland behind Dawnbreak Station, where the cultivated fields gave way to the native Serethi brush, dense, thorny, alive with the scent of prey species that Moat had never encountered. She stayed close to his legs for the first 100 meters, her head swiveling, her nostrils flaring, the subsonic chirr running so low and constant that the ground vibrated under his boots. Then she stopped. Her ears rounded, mobile, tufted with the first adult guard hairs, swiveled forward and locked. Something in the brush had moved. She looked at Harlan. He crouched beside her and said quietly, "Go." She didn't move. Her copper-gold eyes held his, and the chirr changed pitch, the questioning tone, the one that meant she was asking for information she didn't have. "It's yours," he said. "Go find it." She went. She moved through the brush with a fluidity that stopped his breath, not the clumsy tumbling of a domestic animal, but the low, gliding stalk of something that had been designed by 10 million years of evolution to move through exactly this landscape. She disappeared into the scrub, and for 40 seconds there was silence. Then there was a sharp squeal, a burst of subsonic vibration that shook dust from the nearest rocks, and Moat emerged from the brush with a Serethi groundrunner in her jaws, a small, fast prey species about the size of a Terran rabbit. She brought it to Harlan and dropped it at his feet. He looked at the kill, Then he looked at her. She was vibrating with excitement, her fur standing in a ridge along her spine, her copper-gold eyes bright and locked on his face with an expression he could only describe as pride. "Good girl," he said. She ate the ground runner. Then she climbed into his lap and fell asleep. Day 52. Moat weighed 18 kilos. She was hunting ground runners with a success rate that Sari's field notes described, with visible reluctance, as consistent with wild juveniles raised by maternal instruction. She wasn't just fast, she was strategic. She circled downwind, used cover, waited. The instinct was there. It had always been there. Harlan's job was not to teach it, but to give it room. That morning he took her further than usual, past the scrubland, past the cultivated perimeter, into the lower ridge country where the brush grew thick, and the scent marks of adult greymantles began to appear on the stone outcrops. Moat found the first mark and froze. Her hackles rose. The subsonic chirr deepened into something rougher, more adult, a challenge frequency or the beginning of one, cut short by uncertainty. She looked at Harlan. "Not yours," he said, "not yet." She circled the scent mark twice, nose low, every muscle taut. Then she backed away and stayed close to his legs for the rest of the walk. She was learning the boundaries of the world she would eventually claim, and she was learning them the way all apex predators learn, by encountering the edges of someone else's territory and choosing, wisely, to wait. Day 61 brought the first real test. They were 2 kilometers into the lower ridges when Moat stopped moving. Not the hunting freeze, this was different. Her whole body went rigid, ears pinned flat, hackles rising in a solid ridge from her skull to the base of her spine. The subsonic warning kicked in at a frequency Harlan had never felt from her before, deep, rattling, the kind of sound that an adult greymantle used to announce territorial sovereignty. The ground shook under his boots. Then he saw it. An adult female greymantle, standing on a ledge 40 meters upslope. 300 kilos of iron-threaded muscle and bone, her massive head lowered, copper eyes locked on Moat with the flat, assessing regard of a predator evaluating a threat. She was enormous, easily twice Moat's size, her coat fully developed, her 6-digit forepaws gripping the ledge with claws that were twice the length of Moat's and dark as old bronze. Her own subsonic vocalization rolled down the slope like a slow-motion avalanche, a pressure wave that compressed the air and pushed against Harlan's chest hard enough to make his lungs stutter. This was not a curious encounter. This was a territorial warning. The adult was telling Moat, and by extension, the small human standing beside her, that they were on her ground, and that the consequences of staying would be immediate and anatomical. Moat's response was the thing that changed everything. She didn't run, she didn't challenge, she didn't even look at Harlan for guidance. She lowered her own body into a neutral crouch, not submissive, not aggressive, but occupying the precise middle ground that greymantle social dynamics used to signal. "I acknowledge your claim, I am not contesting, I am passing through." She held the crouch for 10 seconds, 20. The adult female's subsonic challenge continued, the pressure building, the rocks around Harlan's feet vibrating. Moat held. She held the way a wild juvenile would hold, body low, ears back, subsonic voice pitched to the narrow band that meant I am young. I am no threat, I am learning. The adult stopped. The silence was immense. The sudden absence of subsonic pressure felt like surfacing from deep water. The adult female lifted her head, regarded Moat for another long moment, then turned and walked back along the ridge without looking down again. Moat stayed in the neutral crouch until the adult was gone. Then she rose, shook her coat, and looked at Harlan with an expression that communicated with remarkable clarity. "That went well." "Yeah," Harlan said. His heart rate was still somewhere in the 140 range. "Yeah, it did." Sari, when he reported the encounter, spent 45 minutes reviewing the biometric data from Moat's scanner tag. "She performed a juvenile subordination display," Sari said, her voice carrying the particular tone of a scientist whose theoretical framework was being dismantled by evidence. Without instruction, without ever having seen an adult do it, that behavior is supposed to be maternally learned. Maybe the mother isn't the only teacher. Are you suggesting she learned it from you? I'm suggesting she learned it from being allowed to be what she is in the place where she belongs. Sari stared at him. Then she opened the case file and added a note that Harlan suspected would take up several pages of her eventual publication. Day 75. Moat weighed 28 kilos. Her hunting range had expanded to 3 kilometers, and she was bringing back larger prey, ridge hares, ground runners, and once a juvenile broadhorn calf that she dragged half a kilometer to deposit at Harlan's feet with an air of unmistakable satisfaction. Her coat was developing the adult iron threading rapidly now, and when Harlan ran his hands along her flank during their evening check, the metallic fibers pricked his calloused fingers like fine wire. She had also begun doing something that wasn't in any of the literature. Every morning before they left the compound, she would walk to the gate, extend her head through the gap, and scan the perimeter for 30 seconds. Then she would return to Harlan, press her head against his thigh and make a specific chirr, a short, low, double-pulse sound that she used at no other time and in no other context. Then they would walk. Sari couldn't identify it. It wasn't a hunting call, a subordination display, a territorial claim, or any of the 24 vocalizations in the documented greymantle repertoire. It might be something new, Sari said, reviewing the frequency analysis. Something she's developed specifically for this relationship, a handler check, a departure signal, and all clear. What does it translate to? Sari looked at him. If I had to guess, I've checked, it's safe, we can go. Harlan said nothing. But he felt it, the quiet, fierce, complicated weight of being protected by something he was supposed to be protecting. By day 90, she weighed 40 kilos. The metallic threading in her fur had developed fully, giving her coat the distinctive iron shimmer of her species. Her forepaws, the 6-digit semi-opposable design that made greymantles unique among Serethi predators, had developed enough dexterity to manipulate objects, turn stones, pry open crevices. Her subsonic communication had deepened into the full adult register, and when she vocalized at close range, Harlan could feel it in his teeth. Sari Vaughn measured her weekly and updated the case file with increasingly disbelieving notes. Subject's musculoskeletal development exceeds predicted growth curves by 18%. Hunting behavior consistent with wild juveniles of equivalent age. No pathological attachment behaviors observed. Subject ranges freely during field sessions and returns to handler voluntarily. Recommend continued observation. Recommend continued observation. That was Sari's way of saying, I have no idea how you're doing this, but don't stop. Keithra Solvin's inspections became monthly, then bi-weekly, then, when Moat reached 60 kilos and the colonial administrators began asking uncomfortable questions about the large predator being walked through the outskirts of the settlement by a single unarmed human, weekly. Day 105. A Vithani maintenance worker named Pren walked around the corner of Building 7 at the wrong moment. Moat was lying in the compound doorway, half asleep, and the sudden motion, Pren's toolbox swinging, his boot striking the gravel, triggered the defensive response before Harlan could intervene. Moat rose. She rose the way an adult greymantle rises when something moves too fast near the thing it guards. All at once, every muscle engaged, hackles flat, claws out, subsonic warning at the teeth-rattling register that made Pren's coffee thermos vibrate off his toolbox and shatter on the composite walkway. She didn't lunge. She didn't snarl. She stood between Pren and Harlan with her copper-gold eyes locked on the Vithani's face, and her body in the rigid posture that every field manual classified as pre-strike. Pren froze. He was a maintenance worker, not a wildlife specialist. He had no protocol for this. He had a wrench in one hand and the expression of a man who was reconsidering every career choice that had led him to this particular corner of this particular building. "Don't move," Harlan said. He was already crossing the compound. "Don't look at her eyes. Lower your tools slowly." Pren lowered the wrench. His hands were shaking. Harlan reached Moat and put his hand on the back of her neck, the thick ruff of iron-threaded fur where the metallic filaments were densest. "Stand down," he said. Quiet, ordinary, the same voice he used for everything. Moat's hackles dropped. Her claws retracted. The subsonic warning faded from teeth rattle to chest hum to silence. She turned her head, pressed it against Harlan's hip, and made the departure check sure. All clear, no threat. Pren backed away and filed a report. Keithra added it to the growing file of incidents that each, individually, were not Protocol 7R violations, but that collectively were building a case that the Colonial Council couldn't ignore. She didn't attack him, Harlan said, when Keithra brought it up. She displayed pre-strike posture at a civilian from 3 meters. She displayed guardian behavior. There's a difference. Ranger Voss, the difference between guardian behavior and a mauling is approximately 1/10 of a second, and the cooperation of an animal that weighs more than most of my staff. You understand the position this puts me in. He understood. He understood that the compound was shrinking around them, that the settlement's tolerance had a weight limit, and that Moat was growing past it. Every week she was stronger, faster, more capable of the violence that Keithra feared and that Harlan knew with absolute certainty she would never initiate unprovoked. But certainty wasn't policy, and policy was what kept the compound open. "The council wants a timeline," Keithra said, standing at the fence while Moat lay across the threshold of the compound with her massive head resting on her forepaws, watching Keithra with the lazy intensity of a cat watching a bird it couldn't be bothered to chase. "They want to know when the release happens. When she's ready. And when will that be?" Harlan looked at Moat. She looked back. The copper-gold eyes held no fear, no confusion, no dependency. She looked at him the way she looked at the landscape, as something known, something mapped, something that belonged to the territory of her understanding. "Soon," he said. He wasn't ready. That was the truth he didn't say to Keithra, or to Sari, or to the Colonial Council, or to the Vethani security officers who had started carrying sidearms when Moat was in the settlement perimeter. He wasn't ready because the thing he had built with this animal, this patient, daily, wordless negotiation between a human and a creature that evolution had designed to be alone, was the closest thing to a conversation he'd had in years, and the idea of ending it sat in his chest like a stone. He'd been a ranger on Surith II for 11 years. Before that, he'd been a ranger on Keseth Prime, and before that on Talvari Station, and before that on a succession of colonial outposts where the work was solitary. The fauna was dangerous, and the human population was small enough that he could go weeks without speaking to another person. He was good at the work because he was good at being alone, and he'd never questioned that until Moat crawled onto his knee on a cold mountain ridge and fell asleep against his heartbeat. She had changed the shape of his solitude. She had filled a space he hadn't known was empty. And now the work, his work, the work he'd chosen, the work he believed in, required him to undo it. Day 120. Moat weighed 70 kilos. She hunted alone in the upland ridges for hours at a time, ranging 5, then 10, then 15 kilometers from the compound before circling back. She encountered adult greymantles at territorial boundaries and held her ground, not challenging, not submitting, but standing in the neutral space between and letting the subsonic exchange run its course. The adults tolerated her. Some of them, Sari reported from her observation blinds, seemed to recognize something in her scent, the signature of a lineage, a familial thread that connected her to the territorial network even though she had been raised outside it. She was finding her place in a world that didn't know she existed. Day 131. The thing Harlan had been dreading happened, and it didn't happen the way he expected. He was alone in the compound at dusk, repairing a faulty climate sensor, when a sound he'd never heard before came rolling across the station from the eastern perimeter. A greymantle challenge vocalization at full adult register, deep enough to rattle the tools on his workbench and crack the water glass on his desk. Not Moat's voice. Deeper, rougher, an adult male. Harlan grabbed his field pack and ran. He found them at the edge of the scrubland, 200 meters beyond the settlement fence. Moat was standing in a clearing, her body in full bristle, hackles raised, claws extended, tail rigid, subsonic warning running at a frequency that vibrated the branches of the nearest brush. Facing her was a male greymantle easily twice her weight, a territorial adult, fully mature, his iron-threaded coat scarred along the flanks from years of dominance disputes, his copper eyes flat and hard, his six-digit forepaws dug into the earth in the braced posture that preceded a charge. The male was between Moat and the settlement. Between Moat and Harlan. She wasn't defending territory, she was defending him. The male's subsonic challenge built in intensity, a pressure wave that pushed against Harlan's chest and blurred his vision at the edges. Moat held her ground. She was 70 kilos against 180. She was 11 months old against a full adult with years of territorial experience. Every metric said she should run. Every instinct in every field manual Harlan had ever read said a juvenile in this situation retreats. Moat did not retreat. She shifted her weight forward. The subsonic warning deepened, not to match the male's register, which she couldn't, but to a frequency Harlan hadn't heard from her before. A frequency that was all edges, all threat, all I will not move. The adult male's ears twitched. His charge brace shifted fractionally, his weight rocking back a centimeter. He was recalculating. Harlan spoke, not loudly, not with authority, just his ordinary voice, the voice he'd been using for 11 months in the compound and the ridges and the long walks through scrubland. Moat, easy. The effect was immediate and visible. Moat's hackles dropped 2 centimeters. Her claws retracted halfway. The all-edges subsonic shifted back to the territorial neutral register, the same display she'd used with the adult female months ago, but deeper, heavier, carrying 11 months of growth and confidence behind it. I am here. I will not contest, but I will not leave. The adult male stared, not at Moat, at Harlan, at the small, unarmed, impossibly calm human standing 20 meters behind a juvenile greymantle in full defensive posture and speaking to it in a tone that made it listen. The male held the stare for 5 seconds. Then he turned slowly and walked back into the brush, not defeated, not submitting, choosing with the calculation of a mature predator that this encounter was more complicated than he wanted to resolve tonight. Moat watched him go. Then she turned, walked to Harlan, pressed her massive head against his chest, and made the departure check chirr, the double pulse sound she used every morning at the compound gate. Except now it wasn't a departure. It was a report. I checked. It's safe. He's gone. Sari, when she reviewed the sensor data the next morning, sat in silence for a full minute. Then she said, "She performed a guardian intercept. That's a maternal behavior. Mothers do that for cubs. She did it for you." I noticed. Harlan, do you understand what that means? She's not just bonded. She's reversed the polarity of the imprint. In her behavioral framework, you're not the handler, you're the dependent. She's protecting you because she's categorized you as something she's responsible for. Harlan looked at Moat, who was lying in the compound doorway licking the dust from her forepaws with the air of an animal that had done a reasonable evening's work and was ready for dinner. "Yeah," he said, "I know." Harlan watched it happen with the particular ache of a man watching a child learn to walk away from him. Every successful hunt, every extended range, every night she chose to sleep outside the compound under the stars instead of against his side. Each one was a small victory and a small loss, and he tallied them both with the precision of a man who had spent his life keeping field notes on things he couldn't control. Sari noticed. She sat with him on the compound steps one evening while Moat was somewhere in the upper ridges, invisible against the gray stone in the fading light, and she said, "You know the literature says the bond doesn't break cleanly." "I know. The imprinting studies, even the ones that ended badly, showed that the bond persists. The animal remembers. It carries the handler's scent signature in its olfactory memory for life." "What's your point?" "My point is that she'll remember you. After you release her, she'll carry you with her. That's not a comfort, it's a complication. If she encounters you in the wild, she'll approach. She'll expect the relationship to resume. And if you're not there, I'll be transferred. Keithra's already putting through the paperwork. New assignment, new world, clean break." Sari was quiet for a long time. "That's not what I meant by complication." "I know what you meant." Day 150. Moat weighed 90 kilos. She was nearly full juvenile size now, and when she stood on her hind legs, she was taller than Harlan. Her coat had reached its adult density, thick, iron-threaded, shimmering with the chainmail texture that gave greymantles their name. Her jaws could crush bone. Her claws could tear composite plating. Her subsonic vocalization at full register could be felt from 50 meters away, a pressure wave that rolled through the ground like a tremor. She was magnificent. She was also increasingly restless. The compound was too small. The settlement perimeter was too close. She spent more nights in the wild than in the compound now, returning at dawn to check on Harlan, pressing her massive head against his chest, the subsonic churr running low and steady, while he put his hands on the rough iron-threaded fur and felt the enormous engine of her body thrumming beneath his fingers. Then she'd leave again, each time a little later in the morning, each time a little longer before she came back. Harlan filed his daily reports with meticulous precision. He noted her weight, her range, her hunting success rate, her interactions with wild greymantles. He noted the territorial boundaries she was establishing, a ridge system northeast of the settlement, overlapping with but not challenging the territories of 2 adult females. He noted that she had begun scent marking, rubbing the metallic glands along her jaw against stone outcrops, leaving the chemical signature that told other greymantles, "This ground is spoken for." He noted all of it. He did not note what it cost him. The incident happened on day 163. A survey team from the Vethani Expansion Authority arrived at Dawnbreak Station to assess the settlement's growth viability. 4 administrators, 2 engineers, and a security detail of 6, all Vethani, all urban. None of them briefed on the local apex fauna beyond a data summary that described greymantles as large solitary predators, avoidance protocol recommended. Moat was returning from a night hunt when the survey team's shuttle landed. She was moving through the scrubland on the station's eastern perimeter, carrying a broadhorn haunch in her jaws, her coat dark with dawn mist, her copper-gold eyes tracking the unfamiliar lights and sounds of the landing shuttle. She was 90 kilos of iron-threaded muscle and bone, moving through the brush with the silent precision of an animal that had learned to hunt in the wild, and she was curious. She walked out of the brush and into the landing zone. The security detail's response was immediate and predictable. 6 Vethani soldiers in tactical armor, trained for colonial security, saw a 90-kilo apex predator emerge from the darkness carrying a bloody haunch, and they did what their training told them to do. They raised their weapons. Harlan was in the compound, 200 meters away, when he heard the security klaxon. He was running before the second pulse. He reached the landing zone in time to see Moat standing in the wash of the shuttle's landing lights, the broadhorn haunch at her feet, her ears flat, her hackles raised, the subsonic warning running at a frequency that was making the soldier's teeth vibrate. 3 weapons were aimed at her center mass. A 4th was tracking for a headshot. The survey team's lead administrator was shouting orders that nobody could hear over the subsonic rumble. Moat's claws were extended, all 10 of them, bronze and curved, digging into the landing pad's composite surface. She wasn't attacking, she was afraid. Harlan walked between the guns and the animal. "Stand down," he said, not to Moat, to the soldiers. The security detail commander, a Vethani lieutenant with more protocol training than field sense, kept his weapon raised. "Ranger, clear the line of fire. Lower your weapons or she'll interpret the posture as a predatory threat and respond accordingly. You have about 4 seconds. That animal is mine. Lower your weapons now." The lieutenant looked at Harlan, a lean, weathered human standing unarmed between 6 armed soldiers and an apex predator that could tear through tactical armor like wet paper, and some calculation happened behind his silver-gray eyes. He lowered his weapon. The others followed. Harlan turned to Moat. She was vibrating, her fur standing in a solid ridge from skull to tail, her copper-gold eyes wide and locked on the soldiers with an intensity that was one hair trigger from violence. He crouched. He put his hand on her jaw, the massive, bone-crushing jaw that could end him in a single convulsive bite, and he said, "Easy." The subsonic warning dropped. It didn't stop, but it dropped from the rattling teeth frequency to the low chest thrum that Harlan knew as unease. Her hackles slowly flattened. Her claws retracted. She lowered her head and pressed it against his chest, and the chirr changed to the questioning tone, the soft, searching vibration of a cub asking for reassurance from the only parent it had ever known. "Easy girl," Harlan said. "We're fine." Behind him, the survey team's lead administrator was staring. Not at Moat, at Harlan, at the sight of a human crouching in front of an apex predator with his bare hands on its jaw, speaking to it in the same tone a man would use with a frightened child, while 6 armed soldiers stood frozen around them. The lead administrator, a tall Vethani named Orphan, impeccably dressed in expansion authority grays, holding a data tablet that he seemed to have forgotten how to operate, stepped forward. What is that animal doing here?" "She lives here," Harlan said without turning around. His hands were still on Moat's jaw. The subsonic chirr was steady now, the questioning cub register, and he could feel her heartbeat through his palms, fast but slowing. "That is an apex predator classified as non-recoverable. I'm aware of the classification. I'm also aware that she just walked through your landing zone without attacking anyone, and the only reason this situation escalated is that your security detail pointed weapons at a frightened animal." Orphan's mouth opened and closed. The lieutenant shifted his weight. One of the soldiers, a young woman at the back of the detail, the one who hadn't raised her weapon quite as fast as the others, was watching Moat with an expression that was not fear. It was fascination. "She dropped the kill," the young soldier said quietly. "Before the standoff started. She dropped it and stepped back. That's a non-aggressive signal." The lieutenant glared at her. Orphan looked between Harlan, Moat, and the broadhorn haunch lying forgotten on the landing pad, and his expression shifted from outrage through confusion to the particular discomfort of a bureaucrat confronting something that didn't fit in the approved categories. Keith Sullivan arrived 40 seconds later, bolt rifle in hand, and managed the administrative fallout with the grim efficiency of someone who had been expecting this exact scenario. She pulled Orphan aside. She reviewed the security footage. She took statements from the detail, from Harlan, and from the young soldier who had noticed the dropped kill. She compiled everything into a report that was, by any fair reading, an exoneration, but that she knew and Harlan knew would not be read fairly. The survey team filed a formal incident report classifying the encounter as a Level 3 fauna-civilian contact event. The security detail filed a complaint alleging inadequate perimeter protocols. Orphan filed a separate memorandum recommending immediate remediation of the anomalous apex fauna presence at Dawnbreak Station, using language that managed to avoid the words kill it, only by extensive use of bureaucratic circumlocution. The Colonial Council convened an emergency session. Sari was asked to present the case file data. She did, with the precise, relentless thoroughness of a scientist who understood that 11 months of work and one animal's life depended on the quality of her charts. The council listened. They reviewed the incident footage. They noted that Moat had not, in fact, attacked anyone, that she had dropped her kill, retreated, and raised a defensive posture only after weapons were pointed at her. Then they voted. Harlan sat in the compound with Moat's head on his knee and waited for the verdict. It came 3 days later. Keithra delivered it in person, standing at the compound fence with a data tablet and the expression of someone carrying news that was going to hurt. "The council has approved the release," she said, "effective within the week." "On what terms?" "Full wild release. Upper Ridge Territory, Northeast Sector, the area she's already establishing in. Monitored by remote sensor for the first 90 days. No contact. Ranger Voss, no contact means no contact. You don't track her. You don't visit the ridge. You don't leave food, clean severance." "And my reassignment?" "Pending. The authority is processing a transfer to Kesseth Station. Different world, different sector. You'll be briefed when it's confirmed." Harlan looked at Moat. She was lying across the compound threshold, her massive body blocking the gate the way she always did when she sensed tension in his posture, not protecting exactly, but positioning herself between him and whatever was wrong. Her copper-gold eyes moved from Harlan to Keithra and back, and the low subsonic chirr was steady, watchful, alert. "I need 5 days," Harlan said. "You have 7, use them." He used them. The first day, he took her into the scrubland where she'd caught her first ground runner. She didn't hunt. She walked the old paths with her nose low, reading scent trails that had layered over the months, her own trails, the prey species she'd chased, the ghost traces of older passages. She moved through it the way a person moves through a childhood home, recognizing corners. The second day, they walked the lower ridges. Moat found the ledge where the adult female had challenged her. The scent mark was gone now, weathered to nothing, and Moat stood on the ledge herself and laid down a new mark. She rubbed the metallic glands along her jaw against the stone with slow, deliberate pressure, and the chemical signature she left was not a juvenile's tentative claim, but the full adult territorial announcement of an animal that had decided this ground was hers. Harlan watched from below and said nothing. The third day, she disappeared. She left the compound before dawn, no departure check, no double pulse chirr at the gate, just the soft sound of her massive body passing through the brush, and then silence. Harlan tracked her on the remote sensor network for the first hour, watching the blip move northeast into the upper ridges. Then the blip entered a canyon where the sensors couldn't follow, and he lost her. He spent the day in the compound. He repaired equipment that didn't need repairing. He organized supplies that were already organized. He sat on the compound steps and looked at the ridges and did not allow himself to think the word gone. She came back at sunset. She walked into the compound carrying nothing, no kill, no trophy, no offering. She walked directly to Harlan, pressed her head against his chest, and held it there for a long time. The subsonic chirr was the deep one, the one from the core, the one that Sari's instruments couldn't fully map. When she finally pulled back, her copper-gold eyes were calm and certain. She had been scouting. She had been walking the territory she would claim, the ridges she would defend, the ground she would hold when she was no longer his. The fourth day, they walked together again, the lower ridges, the scrubland edge, the path between the compound and the wild that they had worn smooth over 11 months of morning departures. Moat hunted. She brought kills back to share, dropping them at his feet with the proprietary generosity of an animal whose understanding of provision was absolute. "You are mine to feed, the way I was yours." Harlan ate his field rations. Moat ate hers. They sat on a flat rock on the lower ridge and watched the valley below, the settlement, the prefab buildings, the cultivated fields, the broad green lowlands where broadhorns grazed. The wind carried the scent of frost and native brush and the distant salt of the Serethi flatlands, and Moat breathed it with the deep, full intake of an animal that had learned this air the way a child learns language. Unconsciously, totally, as the foundation of everything. The fifth day, Sari came. She brought something Harlan hadn't expected, a small data chip, pocket-sized, sealed in a protective case. The complete record, Sari said. Every measurement, every observation, every note, 11 months, she held it out. This is yours. Keep it and publish it. I will, but this copy is yours. Because someday, on whatever world you end up on with whatever animal you're sitting next to at 3 in the morning, you're going to want to remember that you did something nobody thought was possible. And you're going to want the proof. Harlan took the chip. He didn't look at it. He put it in his chest pocket next to the place where Moat pressed her head every morning. Thank you, Sari. Don't thank me. I'm the one who gets to publish the paper that rewrites the greymantle rehabilitation classification. My career thanks you. She almost smiled, almost. On the 6th morning, Sari Vaughn met him at the compound. She had her biometric scanner and her case file, and she was not wearing her usual expression of clinical detachment. She looked, for the first time in Harlan's experience, like she was going to cry. Final measurements, she said, for the record. She measured Moat with shaking hands. Weight, 94 kilos. Height at shoulder, 82 centimeters. Length nose to tail, 191 centimeters. Dentition, full adult set, all 38 teeth present and functional. Claw extension, 6.2 centimeters, full adult bronze, retractable. Coat density, full adult threading, iron filament count consistent with wild specimens. She's perfect, Sari said, and her voice broke on the word. Harlan took the data tablet and signed the final assessment. At the bottom, in the field marked handler's recommendation, he wrote 2 words, ready, release. The 7th morning was cold. Harlan woke before dawn in the compound, the last time he knew that he would wake here with the weight of her against his side, the subsonic churr running through the concrete floor and into his bones. Moat was pressed along his left flank, her massive head resting on his forearm, her breath slow and even, her copper-gold eyes closed. The iron threading in her fur caught the faint light of the heat lamp and shimmered like chainmail. He lay there for a long time. He listened to the churr. He felt the weight. Then he got up. He dressed. He packed his ranger kit, the same kit he'd carried the day he found her, minus the canteen she'd drunk from on a cold mountain ridge 11 months ago. He opened the compound gate. Moat rose, stretched the way greymantles stretched, a full-body extension, forepaws forward, hindquarters high, every muscle visible beneath the shimmering coat, and padded out into the gray pre-dawn light. They walked. Not toward the settlement, not toward the station. Northeast, toward the upper ridges, toward the territory she'd been building all these months. The scent-marked stone outcrops and the hunting runs, and the high overlooks where she lay in the afternoon sun, and watched the valley below with the calm, proprietary regard of an apex predator surveying its domain. Keithra had offered an escort. Harlan had declined. Sari had asked to come. Harlan had declined that too. This was between him and the animal, and it was private in the way that all necessary endings are private, too important for witnesses, too fragile for words. They reached the ridgeline at dawn. The Serethi sun broke over the eastern peaks and flooded the upland country with pale amber light, the same light that turned Moat's iron-threaded coat into something that looked like hammered silver, that lit the copper gold of her eyes until they blazed. The air smelled of frost and stone, and the green acid scent of native brush. Below them, the valley stretched toward the distant settlement, and beyond that, the lowland plains where broadhorns grazed and hook-beaked scavengers wheeled. Moat stood on the ridge and looked out, not down at the settlement, out into the country that was hers. Harlan sat on a flat rock, 10 meters behind her and watched. She didn't look back for a long time. She stood there, her massive body silhouetted against the brightening sky, her fur rippling in the mountain wind, and she breathed the wild air with the deep, full-chest intake of an animal that recognized its home. The subsonic chirr had stopped. In its place was silence, the silence of an animal that was no longer asking questions. Then she turned. She walked back to him. She lowered her massive head, the head that could crush bone, that housed a jaw strong enough to shatter composite plating, and she pressed it against his chest. The chirr came back, but not the questioning chirr, not the warning thrum, not the contentment hum of a cub against a human ribcage. Something deeper. Something Harlan had never heard before, a resonance that seemed to come not from her throat but from the core of her body, a sound that was recognition and farewell, and something else that didn't have a word in any language he knew. He put his hands on her jaw. He felt the rough iron-threaded fur under his palms, the heat of her body, the enormous quiet power of an animal that could destroy him and had chosen, every day for 11 months, not to. "You're ready," he said. She held the contact for 3 breaths, 4, 5. Then she pulled back. She looked at him, one long, steady, copper-gold look that held no fear, no confusion, no pleading. It held recognition. It held something that Harlan, with his broken nose and his scarred hands and his 26 years of reading animals on worlds where nobody else wanted to go, could only call knowing. She knew what was happening. She knew what he was doing. She knew he was letting go. She turned and she walked into the wild. Not running, not looking back, walking the low, gliding, sovereign stride of a greymantle moving through its own territory, an apex predator returning to the landscape that had made it. She moved through the brush and over the ridgeline, and her iron-threaded coat caught the morning light and flashed silver once, twice, and then the ridge swallowed her and she was gone. Harlan sat on the flat rock for a long time. The mountain wind moved across the ridge with a sound like breathing. The Serethi sun climbed higher, burning the frost off the stone outcrops, warming the brush until the green acid scent of native vegetation rose sharp and clean. Below the ridge, a broadhorn herd grazed in the valley, their massive shapes moving slowly through the lowland grass. Hook-beaked scavengers wheeled in the thermals above the eastern peaks. The world continued. It had no interest in the human sitting alone on a rock with empty hands, and the particular stillness of a man who had just finished the hardest work of his life. He did not cry. He had not cried in years, and he did not start now. But he sat on that rock with his hands on his knees and the mountain wind in his face and the silence where her churr had been, and he felt the shape of the thing she had taken with her when she walked away. The piece of his solitude that she had filled, now open again, now empty, now his to carry. He sat there until the sun was fully up and the ridge was warm. Then he stood, picked up his ranger kit, slung it over his shoulder, and turned toward the settlement. The path down was the same path they'd walked up together, and his boots found the marks they'd left in the soft ground, 2 sets of prints going up, 1 set coming down. He didn't look back at the ridge. That discipline, he knew, would cost him less now than it would tomorrow. The walk back to Dawnbreak Station took 40 minutes. He came in through the eastern perimeter gate, past the scrubland where Moat had caught her first ground runner, past the cultivated fields where the broadbacks grazed behind their composite fencing, past the maintenance buildings and the atmospheric processors, and the landing pad where, 17 days ago, she had walked out of the dark with a broadhorn haunch and changed the trajectory of everyone's morning. Keithra was waiting at the authority office. She didn't ask how it went. She looked at his face and she knew. "The transfer paperwork is on your desk," she said. "Thank you, Keithra." She nodded. Then she said quietly, "For what it's worth, Ranger Voss, the council reviewed Sari's full case file last night. They've recommended that the Galactic Fauna Index reclassify the greymantle rehabilitation protocol." "Reclassify it how?" From non-recoverable to handler-dependent single-bond methodology, Sari's data was conclusive. 11 months, no pathological behaviors, no incidents of unprovoked aggression, successful integration into the wild territorial network. They're citing it as a case study. Harlan absorbed that. It was the thing he had wanted, the institutional acknowledgement that the file was wrong, that Protocol 7R was based on insufficient data, that the next orphaned greymantle cub might survive because of what he'd done. It should have felt like a victory. It felt like the afterimage of something bright, present, but already fading. "Good," he said. "That's good." Keithra watched him for a moment. "You did something no one believed was possible." "She did something no one believed was possible. I just stayed close." He filed the transfer paperwork. He packed his quarters. It took less than an hour. He traveled light, and the quarters had never accumulated much beyond the necessities. A cot, a footlocker, a workbench, the portable terminal he used for field reports. He'd lived in rooms like this on 7 worlds across 3 sectors, and he'd left each one with the same economy. The only difference was that this time, when he folded the last thermal blanket, the spare he'd used to pad the satchel on day 1, his hands slowed for a moment before he put it in the storage bin. He cleaned the compound. He dismantled the nest, the scrubgrass and thermal blankets he'd arranged against the wall of the enclosure on day 2, the hollow where Moat had curled against his side for 150 nights, her subsonic churr running through the concrete and into his bones. He stored the heat lamp. He swept the drainage floor. He closed the gate and latched it, and the compound was empty, a 4-meter square space with composite walls and nothing inside it that mattered anymore. He wrote his final report and submitted it to Keithra with a cover note that said, "Case file closed. Subject released. No further contact recommended." Sari caught him at the shuttle pad. She had no data tablet this time, no scanner, no case file. Just herself, the quiet Tessavari biologist who had spent 11 months documenting something impossible and was now watching the man who'd done it walk away. "The paper will change the field," she said. "Every colonial wildlife authority with an apex orphan on their hands will have a new option, because of what she did. Because of what she is." Sari nodded. Then she extended her hand. Harlan shook it. Her fingers were slender, precise, a scientist's hands, and they gripped his scarred ranger's palm with a firmness that said more than the handshake. "Go save another one," she said. He boarded the shuttle, the hatch closed, the engine spooled. Below him, Dawnbreak Station shrank to a scatter of prefab buildings in a valley that had never looked particularly important and still didn't. The upper ridges rose beyond it, cold, gray, ancient, unbroken. Somewhere in those ridges, Moat was hunting. She was building. She was becoming what she had always been designed to become, in a landscape that would challenge her and shape her and hold her for as long as she lived. He had given her that. It was the best thing he had ever done, and it was the thing that hurt the most, and those two facts were not contradictions. They were the same truth, viewed from either side of a distance that would only grow. The shuttle broke atmosphere. Harlan Voss looked out the viewport at the curve of Surith II falling away below him, the green lowlands, the gray ridges, the thin line of dawn light along the eastern edge, and he let it go. 3 months later, Sari Vaughn sent him a message. It was brief. It contained a single image captured by a remote sensor on the upper ridge. Moat, now over 100 kilos, standing on a granite overlook with the valley spread below her, her iron-threaded coat blazing in the afternoon sun. She was not alone. Beside her, pressed against her flank, was a smaller shape, another greymantle, young, male, lean. A mate. The message read, "Sensor 7, Ridge Northeast, Day 89. She's denning, Sari." Below it, a postscript. "She visits the compound some nights. Sits outside the gate for a while, then leaves." Harlan read the message twice. He closed the terminal. He sat in his new quarters on Keseth Station, smaller, colder, emptier. and he let the silence settle around him the way silence does when you've done the hard thing and the hard thing was right. He didn't write back. There was nothing to write. She was wild, she was whole, she was everything he'd raised her to be. And the file that had said non-recoverable was wrong. 67 days later, a second message arrived. Sari again, shorter this time, 2 cubs, both female. She brought them to the compound gate last night and sat there until dawn. Keithra watched from the window and didn't move. Harlan read it. He set down the tablet. He walked to the viewport of his quarters and looked out at the unfamiliar stars of a system he didn't care about on a station he hadn't learned to call home. And for the first time in 26 years of field work on the far edges of explored space, Harlan Voss put his hand on the cold glass and let himself feel the full weight of what letting go actually means. It means the empty space where they slept against your side is not a wound but a doorway, the opening through which everything you taught them walks out into the world and becomes more than you could have made them. He stood there for a long time. Then he turned from the viewport, walked to his desk, opened the transfer request database, and began searching for postings on worlds with apex fauna and rehabilitation programs that needed rangers willing to do the work that nobody believed in. The file had said non-recoverable. The wild said otherwise.